My name is Amelia Herrera, and I am a native of New Orleans, Louisiana. Nursing wasn't always on the radar for me. Although my mother worked in healthcare, she was a nurse, I always fought against it. But after becoming a mother myself and realizing that I didn't want to actually go into law enforcement because that is where I started. I started off with LAPD. I thought I wanted to work with SWAT in Los Angeles, and I entered into the academy. And I was pretty good at it until I had my first ride along. And I would hear the officers talk about certain neighborhoods as we entered certain neighborhoods, how they would describe people of color, people like me. And so I knew that wouldn't be the field that I would work in. So eventually, I followed the route that I didn't think I would, and that was to become a nurse like my mom. I came back to Louisiana, Baton Rouge in 2013 because my mother was very ill, terminally ill, and I moved back to take care of her. And eventually I transferred my license here from California, and I started working with Our Lady of the Lake. It was a great job. I was the supervisor on the floor, triage nursing. However, it was very stressful. It was very stressful, but I found myself throwing myself into work because earlier in 2014, I lost my husband, and he was murdered by someone we knew. And within 6 months of losing my husband, my mom passed. So the Lady of the Lake became my structure because I was actually a walking zombie. You know, I had functions, but I was very empty inside. Everything inside was dark. I was in a complete mental breakdown. Like, you know, I'm screaming out from the inside, but nobody could hear me. I'm beating on the walls, but nobody could see because I did what was asked of me. I performed my job and I did it to the best of my ability. And when I did ask for help, all I was told was, "You're doing a great job. Don't worry, you'll be okay." Because I had 3 children to raise and I felt the need to provide for them, just like as if my husband was still around. So I worked at the lake, and I also worked a second job at a rehabilitation center. And I threw myself into work, and that kind of compensated for the hours of time alone. Giving myself time alone meant I had to think, I had to process thoughts that were in my head, and I didn't want to do that. So I just continued to work. However, I did have to sleep, right? So I started self-medicating so that when I slept, I didn't dream. I didn't want to dream because the dreams were like just a reminder of me losing my husband, having to claim his body after 21 days, and then me losing my mom. I lost the 2 strongest people in my life, and I could not grieve the loss of my husband because I had to be strong for my children. So when I lost my mom, it seemed like everything just collided, and I began to spiral. And being a nurse, I had the ability to write prescriptions, and that's what I did. I began to self-medicate. I didn't think I was harming anyone, and I didn't see the damage that it was causing. So eventually, it led to me being arrested, and I was arrested and taken to East Baton Rouge Parish prison at the age of 48. I have never, ever been in trouble with the law in any way. So It was a very scary experience. But the thing is, I was actually having a mental crisis. I turned to people near me, my supervisors, my family, but no one thought that I was actually hurting as much as I was. They felt like, you're strong, you could do it, because I didn't show it on the outside. So when I was incarcerated, it was one of the scariest things in my life. I remember walking into that place and hearing the loud slam of the door. This iron door, this iron gate that closes behind you before you're booked in. And I remember jumping as if I was just gonna, leap forward. And then I went through the booking process. And as a nurse, we're constantly rubbing and washing our hands and chemicals. It sometimes messes up your fingerprints. I had that problem a lot. So I remember the deputy pressing my fingers so hard to the pad that it was actually hurting, and accusing me of having done something to my fingers to distort my fingerprints. Then shortly after that, the blinding light when you're being processed in. I hadn't started crying yet because, I'm still thinking in my head, I'm processing it all. And then I walked down a corridor where they had cells on each side. And I remember seeing men hanging off of the bars, laying on the floor. There were so many men in one cell. It was like sardines being packed in a can. And it wasn't just one cell. It was like 4 cells. And I was like, where are all these guys coming from? Black men. And it was unreal. And, you hear the remarks like, keep your head up, don't cry. And by then, I guess I had started crying because I could feel the hot flushes coming down my face, but I didn't realize it. But I don't know if I was crying because I was in jail or because of what I saw. And then I was taken back to a room where you have to actually bend over and let the female deputies check your body cavity. And I remember them walking around making jokes like, wow, look at her. Or, woof, fish, with the other ladies that was in the room, and just really being horrible, as if it wasn't humiliating enough to bend down and to open your private parts so they can look in, and they're making jokes. So then they give you the uniforms, and they didn't have a uniform to fit me, so they grabbed one from the corner, the floor in the corner, and they tossed it to me. I remember having to roll it up a few times, and it had the most mustiest smell to it. And then I began to think, hey, I deserve this. I'm in jail. I did something wrong. I obviously deserve this. Shortly after, they walked us down to a pink cell where they kept the women. It was on the same block with the men, but at the corner. And it was just this pack of women of all ages. And they had one phone on the wall for us to make outside phone calls. And when it came my turn, I didn't have anybody to call. I had children that I had left on the outside. My mom she died. My husband was gone. And now my children are left to fend for themselves. And I was locked up because I didn't have the mental treatment that I asked so many times for. I was placed in lockdown, and I remember seeing my mom's face, hearing her voice. But of course, you're in a quiet place, a dark place, and you're already going through a mental crisis, and they put you somewhere where you have no human contact. And it makes you idolize suicide. And I can truly understand why people think about suicide when they enter that place. It's the most horrific place. It's one of the deadliest jails in our nation. And the treatment that you receive there is far worse than inhumane. And I just, now, as I advocate for mental health, I always say jail is never the place to put someone if they're in a mental health crisis or substance addiction. Because all you're doing is putting trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. I remember saying to myself, I just want to live. I just want to get out of this place. The things that I endured while I was there were pretty traumatic. I said I would never talk about them. And when I got out, I would never look back. And when I got this tattoo on my back, it's a tattoo of a rosary that's symbolic of my mom. And it has a rose entwined inside of the rosary and a lock on the end of it. And at the top it says, never look back. But God had a different way of looking at things, because my son began to spiral and do the same thing that I did because I was emotionally unavailable. My case was eventually dismissed, and I got out, and I tried to build my life back after losing my house, my car, my nursing license. I really came out to nothing. So how do you build from nothing when you don't have anything? When you come out of a pretrial detention facility, there's nothing there to help you. And so if you don't have a good support system, you really have to struggle. So I just started doing what I knew how to do, and that's just work. Get my family, get my children back on track. And still didn't receive the help that I needed. So that buried trauma and that mental anguish and depression, it was still there. So I didn't see my son doing the same thing that I was doing. And he was arrested. And that's when I said, I gotta go back in. I have to look back now. I have to go back in, and I have to start fighting the hardest fight that I've ever fought, because I have to fight for my child. Because I remember seeing all those African American men in that cell, on those cells. I remember the constant yelling, the fights, the beatdowns, the lack of care. I remember, and to think that my child had to endure this. Yeah, I put my boots on, strapped them up, and I got ready for the fight.